Uh, Lots of definitions for grazing management, but really you're just using some grazing animals on the forage on the ground and the soils that are there, and it's the interaction for any sort of defined or objective that you're looking for: ecological, uh, ecosystem protection, and of course economical. We're all here; producers are here there to make money. So that's better. Yeah, thanks. So I think the first priority of any livestock operation is we need to grow forage. That's what the livestock need. So understanding the plants in the pasture and how they respond to grazing, how they respond to rest, how they respond to their climatic conditions. So understanding what you have there and what the resource is. The old adage that if you leave more leaves on the ground, it'll grow more grass. More forage can be grown if there's leaves behind that solar panel. Adequate rest is important, and we talked a little bit about that, and we'll talk more about that. And then greater plant diversity means resilience. So in dry conditions, we're all experiencing them. Different varieties, many different plants out on that landscape have different water needs. They can tolerate more drought. They grow better in wetter conditions. So having a variety of plants on that landscape is only advantageous. But of course, soil is the foundation for all the grass growth. So we need to protect that soil. We need to enhance the growth on it. So minimizing the major disturbances of soil is very important. We don't want to be plowing these rangelands yearly like a cropping system. Native range, we want to avoid it completely. Keep soil covered with vegetation and litter. We talked a little bit about that already. There's a huge advantage of leaving some of that material, that grazing, for the next year. It falls to the ground, it decomposes, keeps the ground cool and moisture. And keeping living roots in the soil. So having things out there growing throughout the growing season, keeping the root zone, keeping the soil cycling. Again, promoting plant diversity, so having many different types of forages out on that landscape together. And then, of course, what we're here to do, integrate that livestock, use it to harvest that grass, and promote the ecosystem and the sustainability of it. So here's a good slide: managing for cover carryover. So we talked a little bit about it. Bill mentioned it. So can anybody give me a definition or their definition of litter now? Anybody? Anything we've learned from last time? So it's last year's biomass, right? So things that died after the growing season, standing maybe, or down on the ground and ready to decompose, partially decomposed. So it's important to insulate the soil, keep the soil cool, keep it moist, helps with water infiltration. Those Bart mentioned, I think. You get a little shot of rain, it goes down, stays in that thatch layer, in that litter. Grass can grow in that. Reduces the evapotranspiration, so keeps that ground moisture and not hot. The sun can't hit it. The water won't come out of the soil so quickly. Nutrient cycling. So as those plants decompose, that's your nutrient cycling. That's the nutrients that the next year's grass needs, and prevents soil erosion. So simply from wind and rain events hitting the soil and washing it off, moving it to another site. So in this case, this litter is a good thing, right? Catherine. Yeah, exactly, right? Warmer soil. Plants, a lot of plants like cooler soil for their growth pattern. They get dried out, baked. But yeah, it's really about keeping the soil, as much soil moisture there as possible. Yeah. It definitely works against you in the springtime, right? That heavy thatch layer the plants won't come as quick in the spring. So you may think, oh, what's going on? But it'll pay dividends in the end because of the moisture that's retained. Yeah, I think at one pasture range day, we actually just had them put their hand, in under an area that had one that was totally exposed, bare ground, and you could, yeah, just feel it was hot to cool. So yeah, quite evident. So, so we've talked about carryover and leaving some behind, and really grazing management can come down to kind of four basic principles. And so, no matter what management system you use or subscribe to, there's four basic things that kind of go into every one of those. So balance your forage demand with the forage supply that's available. Distribute those animals across the grazing area evenly, and we touched on that, and we'll go into it some more. Minimize the grazing events during sensitive periods. So there's some landscapes that have sensitive times. You want to try to minimize grazing at that. And then rest. Allow effective rest. Yeah, and I will talk about it, but so different types of grasses, we'll talk about that, whether they're native species, some prefer and do better with grazing later in the season. Tames can tolerate early grazing, tame species. But, sensitive areas might be riparian areas or any ecologically separate areas, wooded areas, something that needs certain times of rest to be its best. We'll talk about it a bit. So, balancing your supply. How much forage do I need? So, how many animals are going to be grazing for how long? And how much forage do I have out there? And Bill talked a lot about ways we can figure out what forage is available out there. So, I mean, it's not a new concept. If the demand is greater than what the forage supply is, we're in big trouble, right? It's overgrazing. So, grazing too much for too long, or too soon after a grazing event, or too often. So forage supply. So how much do we have? So the first thing we need to realize is what area of use we're dealing with. Bill talked about that a little bit. Is it an open, short grass prairie situation? Is it a aspen parkland, forested site? Is it a native species on that? Are they tame species? Size and of the field of the pastures. So basic acres that we have to deal with. And the soil textures, sandy sites, loam sites, they all produce the available forage. So that's a general, as Bill mentioned, the first place you can start and kind of plan what forage you have available. So the pasture condition, and I prompted him to talk about that. So do you have the most productive dominant species in your stand? Or is it ones that are a little weedy and less palatable, less preference for the animals to graze? So we have to get a handle on that a little bit. Past management. Do we have a bunch of bare soil, or do we have litter there? And then the one that's hard to predict, and it's more of a yearly thing. What are our growing conditions, and are we expecting a dry year? Is it going to look like it's going to be moister? So these are things you can put into when you're trying to figure out how much supply you'll have for a grazing season. And there's lots of good references and book values, generalizations that we can start with. We know a rangeland should support this many cows for this long, and those are averages, right? So we take them at that value, start with them, and then adapt from there. We can get more technical and actually go out and clip an area in our fields, give us an exact dry it and weigh it, as Bill mentioned, give us an exact number of what forage is available. But probably the biggest is the previous year's knowledge and the record keeping that we have. How many days of grazing do we take from that field in the past? So now the demand. How much forage do we need? So the animal inventory, number of animals and the species. Goats, horses, bison, cattle, they graze different types of species in different amounts. And what weights? Stage of production makes a difference. Listen to Bart talk about that. Cows are looking to get back into calf, and they're nursing a calf. They're going to take more good quality forage than an overwintering situation. So kind of just a general rule of thumb for a beef cow, a 1,000-pound beef cow needs 26 pounds of dry material per day to sustain. So that's good quality forage with an average amount of nutrition. So from there, you can decide, do I have 1,500-pound cows? Well, now it's 39 pounds, right? So you can make a guess when you go into how much forage that cow is going to take. So a general rule of thumb, cattle, they need about 2 to 3% of their live weight during grazing season consumed per day. Bison are a little more efficient, 1.5 to 2.7. Horses are a little more efficient again. So that's kind of the general starting point of trying to, and really I just wanted to highlight, you have to understand what could be available for your growing season and what you're going to need for your herds. And from there, you can plan. Any questions on that or comments? So from there, the planning goes to, how much I want to utilize, how much I can leave behind, how much forage I want to take. So those are the management decisions you go into thinking. So the second principle is just distributing the livestock grazing evenly. So we looked at some of the sites, and on Bill's pictures there, we talked about overgrazed sites, and is that a function of their location? Are the animals not accessing the entire pasture evenly? Are they overgrazing some areas and leaving some completely untouched? And there's a lot of reasons that they can go on. Topography, landscape, is it hilly? The vegetation types, is there some areas that they prefer to graze in where there's areas of the field they're not, they don't like the forage? Size and the shape of pastures, sometimes they can be odd shaped, they can be very large, cattle don't want to access or walk a long distance. And the location of water. I think cattle specifically generally graze, within a mile of their water source. Some animals are better than others at being adventurous and moving around. But something we can think of and plan for. And then animal factors, types of animals, age, and then animal behaviors. So some cows, as I say, are really adventurous and moving around. Some just want to lay around the water. And why do we want to, even the distribution across the pasture? And it's really just to try to reduce that selective grazing, get them to use all the pasture, all the forage, and increase that harvest efficiency and improve nitrogen cycling. So grazing in all areas and increasing the manure distribution. So how can we distribute that grazing pressure? We talked a little bit about it, fencing, right? We can add some fencing in areas that make sense. Maybe water development, putting water in a corner of the field that they won't access. Developing trails in forested sites, we may need to put some cut lines in, give them access to areas, or bridge crossings, water crossings. Bart mentioned moving salt and mineral around, placing it in the areas that cattle don't go. You try to attract them, especially salt. It works really well. Herding, even out there on horseback, taking a herd of cow, moving them out to an area that has good forage that they just aren't accessing for whatever reason. There's a lot of people that actually really enjoy it and love it, and there's a whole kind of, you guys may see it on Instagram and all the social, there's a whole following of herders that herd their animals out and spend days and weeks with their animals, moving them around to the best grazing or the areas they want to have increase their grazing on. So adjusting stocking densities. So this gets into, we'll talk about it in a bit, but increasing the moves and having more animals on a smaller piece of land for a shorter time. So you can do that with some fencing. Or orders of the paddock use, changing how you go through your paddocks throughout the year. And then that goes into the season of grazing. So grazing should begin when the plant development is right. So when the plant is ready to graze. So tame grasses, these bred species generally green up earlier, get ready for grazing in the spring quicker than native species or forested sites. And I know we need to, we have pressures, the animals need to get out in the landscape, but if you have options, whether you have a tame field, maybe that can be the first area to graze, and save forested fields or native pasture till that mid-June, till it gets growing a bit, gets more leaves under it. Or in the fall. Sometimes woody sites or riparian sites are very sensitive at that time. So try to avoid times when the growth cannot sustain the grazing. So this is just kind of a general curve. There's lots of different adaptations of this, but if you think about grass, when it first wakes up out of dormancy, the energy has to come from the roots. They don't have any solar panels, any leaves to collect sunlight and create and photosynthesize. So they take carbohydrates from the root to develop those first few leaves. So very sensitive at that time to grazing. You remove those leaves that are growing, there's less root carbohydrates to get more leaves growing. Then when those leaves start collecting sunlight, the plant grows rapidly, and it can capture and make its own energy. It starts to grow a lot of above ground biomass, and then it also replenishes the roots and strengthens the roots during that period. And this is the time when grazing, is best. And then the third stage is plant maturity. So the plant has developed its seeds. Some of the older leaves are dying off and drying. There's still grazing available, but any new growth has to come from the old. It replaces the old growth. So the growth potential is reduced because the plant is not growing as quickly. And this was Carrie's comment, sensitive areas. So riparian areas that are, swampy, muddy, in the spring for sure, cattle tend to congregate there and can make quite a mess. Restricting that access, maybe with fencing, or maybe not using those fields during the most sensitive times might work. And then distribution problems, right? They hang around there and they can overgraze the areas around those water sources. So the fourth one here, this allowing effective rest, and this is probably the most important, and we talked about it, and we talked about it this morning. So effective rest during the growing season is the most important thing. So when the leaves can capture and use the sunlight, create the carbohydrates, replenish the rootstocks, and increase the plant vigor. And so the recovery is going to be affected by how severe the plant was grazed previously, the season of rest, how moist it is, and different plant species recover at different rates. So if we think about it, like grazing creates an energy deficiency, right? So we take that solar panel, we take it off the plant. So we have to be willing to give that plant time to recover after that grazing event to replenish its energy stores. I should comment on this. So this was a study done with rough plain fescue. What year? 60s maybe, hey? It's in every presentation I've ever done. And it's a rough plains fescue plant that they grazed every 4 weeks. So the one on the left is no clipping done. And I forget the utilizations, but to lesser degree as we go across. Every 4 weeks they clip to the same level. And you can clearly see the rootstocks that plant has lost because of that continuous clipping event. So the one on the right side, it was given no rest. It's got very few solar panels left to collect any solar energy and create any root. So with a plant like that out there, short little plant with hardly any roots, it's going to be tough for it to capture nutrients and moisture from the soil to regain any sort of growth pattern. So any kind of comments or questions on that? It was just a brief kind of get you guys thinking, or maybe lead to more questions. Yeah. So we're going to talk a little bit about, I know this afternoon we're going to we're going to kind of go over some maps and talk about grazing operations and things we can do. So I was just going to go over a little bit about some different grazing schemes and plans. It's definitely not the end-all, be-all, but to get you guys thinking. So really just the grazing system is just a schedule or a plan kind of mapped out before the grazing season on how we're going to do it, how we're going to use that resource, and how we're going to supply enough forage for our livestock. So it must use the forage by the animals, but improving or maintaining the range stock. So we don't want to cause damage. Recognizing the limitations of our system. Are we in a dry area? Do we have relatively productive land that will grow a lot? The grazing systems are always custom, they're customized by every single operation. So you do what works best for you. It has to be efficient and practical and work for your situation. And flexibility. Try something, it doesn't work. Well, let's go a different way. Let's learn from that and move on. So with that, here's kind of just the general, a continuous grazing system. So we've got a pasture there, the green block. We need 120 days of grazing. We turn the animals out there and gather them back up when we're done our grazing system. So, there's less maintenance. We don't have to put a bunch of inputs into it. There's less control for distribution problems, though. They're just allowed to go where they want in that field. And there's little potential for improving any of the range condition if we have problems for that. Generally, stocking rates need to be a little less so that we're leaving some litter behind. The one advantage is if you can provide variability for litter cover. You get patchiness of grazing, and there is an opportunity for other species to live in the short grass, overgrazed areas, or the ungrazed areas. So it does give it an opportunity to create patchiness.
I've heard people talk about that one as the Columbus method. Cattle out in the spring and you go discover them in the fall.
That's a good one. I mean, yeah. See what's left. Yeah, go get them in. So just a simple, and there's lots of different terms for these grazing systems, but just a two-paddock switchback. So we've taken that same block of land, we've divided it in half. We give the animals access to only pasture A for 60 days, and then they get pasture B for 60 days. And of course, you'll vary these with different topography or the size of the pasture, but giving half that pasture rest for half the season. The next year you may switch it, start in pasture B at the spring of the year, and finish off in pasture A. So one fence line, maybe a little bit of water sourcing, not too much investment, gives you some flexibility, gives you some rest. Built 60 days of rest of that growing season into that area. Herd densities increase, utilization increases, and hopefully the range health can increase with that increased rest. And then you can go to a whole level of different rotational grazing, number of paddocks, you can do larger stock densities. And once again, it's just now adding another fence or more fences, depending on the system. So you got more inputs, more management, but you've increased that rest threefold. So now all the animals are only grazing 30 days, and you've got three pastures, that are rested for another 90. So a good opportunity. You really are using the density and the fencing to control the distribution of those animals across the landscape. Good chance to improve the range health and condition. So a rest rotation, same thing. You've got different pastures, but you've just committed to saving one field with absolutely no grazing for a season. So giving all the plants in that field an entire year to rest, develop seed. Those seeds fall out on the ground, and maybe you'll get some opportunity for reseeding the species that you're looking for, the productive species. Yeah. Yeah. So the grazing, it causes a response to the plant to flush. You're removing some of that, and hopefully that litter that maybe if litter levels get too high, if they're unmanaged, Bart mentioned that, you get a loading, and it actually can cause a negative effect, cause the good uh, productive species to decline in the stand. And then I think the biggest thing was the hoof action, right? That litter is being trampled down, touching the ground more, breaking up, incorporating into the soil. Yeah. Yeah, Carrie. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Just to circle it back, like Bart mentioned, like these rangelands, these current systems we're in, they developed with huge bison herds that would come through and cause a lot of disturbance. Wildfires, which we don't get a lot of anymore. There's people that do prescribe burn, but for the most part, so those disturbances are gone. So these rangelands, these native species, definitely benefited from the past from disturbance. Yeah, and removal of litter and incorporation from these bison herds. Yeah, good question. So complementary. So I talked a little bit about this. So you've got that green block. That's our native or our pastured, forested pasture. Is there an opportunity to take an old hayfield or a piece of land that's next or near it, have tame grass on there, and use that first? Save the native or that forested field till later in the year, till into the June period, um, when the growth structure is right. So using that tame grass that comes up early and is ready to graze before the native or the forested sites, and leaving that other resource completely. Can work in the opposite. We've talked about swath grazing and poly grazing and winter feedstuffs. Uh, Maybe you have a tame site and then you use a native forested field until the late fall, and then you can go on to a swath grazing situation. So using different types of resources to benefit the grazing management on any sort of land you're trying to sustain or even improve. So the best grazing system is the one that works for you. And I said that before, and it's the most important thing. So does it allow you, does that grazing system you're using reach your end goals for your land and your cattle operation? Works within the operation resources. So you can only do whatever your land base and your operation, the resources and the limitations you have to work within that. Keeping good records. So learning from what you did, taking notes and learning, how many animals did I run on that field last year? And at the end of the year, maybe there was too much in there. The utilization isn't where I like it. There isn't enough litter. So learning from that. Next year, I won't put as many on there. I won't stock it as heavy. And adapting with experience. So learning and making the changes necessary as you go forward. But being creative is the biggest thing, right? Everyone's got a great amount of talent and range manage experience out there, and learning from each other, and not being afraid to try some things to get to the goal that you're looking for. So in the end, it's a tool. Grazing management is a tool to improve and maintain the health of the range system and the pastures that we have and we're trying to utilize. We can increase the diversity of the plants with proper management, giving the rest and allowing the productive ones to come back. Reducing, I didn't talk too much about it, but invasive weed species often are found in highly disturbed or overgrazed sites. So can we use that to manage those, reduce the spread of the invasives? Reduce the grass recovery time, so just allowing those plants to recover quicker. But overall, we want to try to maximize the plant growth per acre and maximize the economic return. So in the end, the goal is to have a sustainable system, that makes some money, is profitable. So there again, just the four basic principles. You want to balance your supply with your demand. try to even out the grazing pressure and use all your available resources, all the available landscape to a desirable level. Defer if there's sensitive times, and of course allow that important rest during the growing season, those plants to recover and grow next year. Any thoughts, comments? All the things I had put together.